what we intended with this slide here is just to give you a little bit of an overview of the existing sustainability-related finance exams. Obviously, you are on the call, so we assume that you are all interested in the topic of sustainability and ESG, which is quite the developing area in areas like asset management, wealth management, investment banking. So essentially, it touches really all the entire supply chain of finance. And just kind of, if I go one step back and think about why it has been important for me, as I said, I work in business development for a major asset management, and more, in the past few years, the level of sophistication that we have come to experience when talking to our clients in things like sustainability has increased dramatically. And with that, also the expectations of us to understand what we're talking about here. So sustainability is a topic that's here. It's here to stay, and it's only going to become more important as the topic becomes more aware. So what we have on this slide is just the overview of the most prominent sustainability related exams and certificates. These are the CFA Institute Certificate in ESG Investing, the GARP Sustainability and Climate Risk Certificate, and then the EFA Certified ESG Analyst, or short for CESGA. And they, I would go by starting with the CFA ESG. I guess if you think about the way that they are structured, Patrick, can you move on a slide? I think the next slide would be CFA ESG. Oh no, the GARP SCR. There you go, CFA ESG. Exactly. So if we had to kind of break down what the exam is, it is a high level exam that teaches you on everything sustainable in finance, and particularly from the lens of an investment analyst. So the administrator is CFA Institute, famous kind of institute for financial analysis, and that's also kind of the lens that they take on. In terms of what you will learn is things like, number one, how to disentangle the term ESG, because if you think about ESG, that's quite a broad term that encompasses a ton of different topics and themes. ESG has become a little bit of a catch-all term. And with the CFA ESG, you learn kind of to distill those. You take apart what is the E, what is the S, and what is the G. You learn about the history of sustainable investing. What are the different categories in terms of, for instance, exclusion-based investing, thematic investing, which also includes impact investing, things like engagement and stewardship. You learn about the ESG market as such, which means who are the participants. We already touched a little bit on it, but the entire finance value chain does conduct, in some sense, sustainable investing. You have the wealth manager who has to put together a portfolio for their clients that may include sustainable investments. You have the asset manager who has to analyze companies and make sure that they also factor in ESG factors. You have the investment banks who have to prepare the companies to go public and be scrutinized by the public markets, which also kind of touches on sustainable investments in this market. So that's a little bit what you will learn. If we just start kind of by looking also at the facts for the exam, you're looking at the price of round about $800. The way that the exam is administered is by multiple choice. You have to respond 100 questions in 140 minutes. You are flexible in when you want to schedule your exam, and it requires roughly 100 to 130 hours of study time. So 100 to 130 hours, that highly depends on your preparation and your existing touch point with sustainable investing. It may be newer for some and kind of more and some already may have experience in this space. What else? Oh yeah, very, very important, not to be missed, is that it is a CFA exam. It is administered by the CFA Institute. And for some, just the thought of doing a CFA exam may sound a little bit daunting. It is, if you think about the CFA, it's a very technical, very, very analytical exam. The CFA ESG is designed differently. It does not require you to have existing at the CFA. It is not mathematical at all. It's more kind of about definitions. And it really teaches you the foundations of ESG. So after this exam, you will know about terms like stewardship, net zero, Paris Agreement, exclusions, all these different terms. It really, the aim is to disentangle and give you a broad definitional understanding of all ESG. Let's can we go to GARP SCR? Perfect. So GARP is, if we think about kind of, let's start with the facts and figures. It's similar to CFA ESG in that it costs around $600. So you're close enough with the price. Requires you actually the same amount of preparation, 100 to 130 hours. Again, that roughly equates to 3 months of study preparation if you count in your weekends and maybe 1 or 2 evenings after work. The one difference is that the exam has only 80 multiple choice questions. Another difference is also that GARP has 4 answers per question and CFA ESG has 3. And that the exam window is 2 weeks, 3 to 4 times a year. Now, when I took the GARP SCR, one of the most most surprising things to me, I never had experience with GARP. GARP stands, by the way, for Global Association of Risk Professionals. So it's really, if you think about CFA, that comes more from the lens of analysis. It's analyst, it's valuation. It's it really comes from if I put it into 2 categories, it comes from the return perspective, and GARP is more kind of the risk perspective. If you think in terms of risk and return, so you have the risk perspective, and I had never taken an exam kind of in from that perspective, so it was kind very new to just look at sustainability from a risk perspective as opposed to a valuation perspective. And so that was the first kind of a difference. And surprisingly, I found it quite refreshing to look at it from this lens. But then the way, the reason why I would say for people who are interested, they may want to consider to do both is because I expected a large amount of overlap between the 2 exams, and I didn't find that there was much overlap, because in CFA ESG, climate is only talked about in a small kind of chapter within the entire curriculum. So the sustainable and climate risk of GARP focuses entirely only on climate, which is the E in ESG. So ESG is kind of broader, and GARP SCR is very narrow, focused on climate. And that narrow focus really, allows you to go a little bit into detail. Again, GARP also administers the FRM, which is a very complicated, hard exam. This is not it's more definitional, but you look at things more into detail versus the CFA ESG. That's why I thought that those 2 complement each other. And in terms of what you will learn, you can see it on screen. It very nicely explains the foundations of climate change, what it is. They also provide some proof of why scientists are unequivocally certain that it's man-made, or at least it has increased dramatically through human cause. They touch a little bit on sustainability, but then they dive into climate change risk and things like how to process climate change, which is a huge topic, from a risk perspective, and how to incorporate that into portfolios. Those are topics like or chapters like chapter 6, risk measurement and management, climate models and scenarios. You learn about kind of where we are in the trajectory of net zero. What are the most likely pathways going forward? Why there's this huge need for the world to act and to understand climate change and act accordingly. The policies that are being implemented, and that kind of across different jurisdictions. So, if I had to conclude, and if it depends a little bit on where you are, what your career, what your career objectives are. But CFA ESG gives you, the broadest kind of the broadest knowledge around sustainability in finance. And then with the SCR, you can dive deeper into climate specifically, which is arguably the most pressing of the ESG factors. Now, if you go ahead to the last one, CESGA. So, in full transparency, I haven't taken the CESGA simply because there is a huge overlap between CFA ESG and CESGA. But we have read into it. I mean, at Brainie, we are focused on sustainability related finance exams. So definitely we had to take a closer look at CESGA. And what we did find is that there's a little bit of differences more in terms of how the exam is administered. Number one, it's quite a bit more expensive. So prices ranges around $1,500 to $1,800 but you pay more, but you also get online classes. So it's a different experience, right? CFA ESG and GARP SCR, those are classic self-study exams that are that are followed by a multiple choice exam. And CESGA is kind of a, you have online lectures, you have classes, and then the exam itself is also, it only has 20 multiple choice questions. Think again, CFA has 100, GARP has 80, and CESGA also has 9 constructed response questions, which you have to take in 150 minutes. So quite a different experience. I personally, I like kind of self-study and going on the exam kind of on my own time, as opposed to taking classes. The price is way friendlier for the other two as well. Just to touch on kind of what you learn. I mean, it's very, very similar to CFA ESG. The only or the best, the biggest difference between CESGA and CFA ESG is really that with the CESGA, after you have the diploma, you can add CESGA behind your name. So similar to a CFA charter, you can be, maybe, you could be Luca Michienzi, and then CESGA, can be in your name. So those are kind of the differences. This is the current landscape in terms of sustainability related finance exams. Yeah, it depends on where you are in your career, whether you want to dive more deeper into climate, if you want to have a broad understanding of ESG, and then whether you want to do online classes versus self-study, and what your budget is for this exam.